My name is Emma Blackwood, 35, founder and CEO of Blackwood Capital, a private equity firm specializing in distressed asset acquisitions based in Boston. The sound of my uncle's voice cracking on the word "sold" made every head in the auction house turn toward the back row, where Thomas Blackwood sat clutching his wife's hand like it was the only thing keeping him from drowning. The auctioneer's gavel had just fallen on Lot 47, the family estate that had been in our bloodline for 6 generations. And the winning bidder was me. The scent of old wood and desperation hung thick in the musty air, mixing with the sharp tang of my own satisfaction as I watched 20 years of careful planning come to fruition. But why did Thomas look more relieved than devastated? Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. I stood slowly from my seat in the front row, my heels clicking against the worn hardwood floor, as I made my way to the registration table. Every eye in the room followed me, whispers rippling through the crowd, like wind through wheat. The Blackwood estate auction had drawn vultures from 3 states, all hoping to pick clean the bones of what had once been New England's most prominent shipping fortune. They had no idea they were watching a family reunion. "Congratulations, Miss Blackwood," the auctioneer said, his voice carefully neutral as he handed me the paperwork. Final bid of $2.8 million for the complete Blackwood estate, including the main house, guest cottage, and all furnishings. I signed my name with the Mont Blanc pen my father had given me for my 18th birthday, the last gift I'd received before Thomas had convinced him to change his will. The ink was still wet when I felt a presence behind me, the familiar smell of expensive cologne and old guilt. "Emma." Thomas's voice was barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I turned to face my uncle for the first time in 20 years, taking in the gray hair that had once been black, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the expensive suit that couldn't quite hide how much weight he'd lost. He looked older than his 62 years, worn down by something I couldn't quite identify. "Do we?" I folded the deed and slipped it into my purse. "I think we said everything we needed to say 2 decades ago. Emma, please. Not here. Not in front of." He glanced toward the back of the room, where his children sat watching us with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. "In front of your family?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The family you chose over me? That's not how it happened." "Isn't it?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice, so only he could hear. "Because I remember it differently. I remember a 17-year-old girl who'd just lost her parents, standing in your office while you explained why she couldn't access her trust fund. I remember you telling me I'd never be anything, that I should be grateful for the roof over my head." Thomas flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself. And your children's inheritance." I looked past him to where his son Michael and daughter Sarah sat, both in their early 30s now, both staring at us with the kind of fascination people reserved for car accidents. "How much did you steal, Thomas? How much of my parents' money did you use to send them to private school, to buy this house, to fund your lifestyle?" "It wasn't stealing. I was the trustee. You were supposed to be my guardian. There's a difference." The auction house was emptying around us, other bidders collecting their purchases or leaving empty-handed. But Thomas's family remained seated, watching our conversation with the intensity of people witnessing something they knew they shouldn't see. "Emma, I know you're angry." "Angry?" I laughed, and the sound echoed off the high ceiling. "Thomas, I'm not angry. Angry is what I was at 17 when I had to work 3 jobs to pay for community college. Angry is what I was at 25 when I found out you'd been living in my family's house while I slept in a studio apartment above a laundromat. Then what are you now? Successful." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, where my net worth was displayed in real time. $47 million, Thomas. Built from nothing. just like you said I'd never be able to do. His face went pale as he stared at the numbers. How? Hard work, smart investments, and a very long memory. I put the phone away and picked up my purse. I've been tracking every asset you bought with my money for the past 15 years. This house, your investment portfolio, your children's college funds, all of it traced back to my trust fund. That's impossible. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing fraud, which is what you've been committing every day for 20 years. I started walking toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Thomas, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. I'm having the locks changed on Monday. I was almost to the door when I heard footsteps behind me. Not Thomas's measured gait, but something quicker, more desperate. I turned to see his daughter Sarah approaching, her face flushed with emotion. Miss Blackwood, Emma. She stopped a few feet away, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. I'm Sarah, Thomas's daughter. I know who you are. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. She glanced back at her father, who was watching us with an expression of growing panic. Did he really steal your money? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I studied Sarah's face, seeing echoes of my own features in her dark eyes and stubborn chin. We were cousins, after all, though we'd never had the chance to know each other. Why do you want to know? Because if he did, then everything I have, everything I am, is built on a lie. Her voice cracked. My education, my house, my children's college funds, all of it came from money that should have been yours. I felt something twist in my chest, an emotion I couldn't quite name. Sarah, I have 2 kids, she continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. Twin boys, 8 years old. They love their grandfather. They love this house. They love the life we've built. But if that life was stolen from you, it was. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and Sarah flinched as if I'd hit her. Behind her, I could see Thomas starting to move in our direction, his face a mask of desperation. How much? Sarah whispered. The original trust fund was worth $1.2 million in 1995. With compound interest and proper investment, it would be worth approximately $8 million today. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into one of the auction house chairs. $8 million. Plus the house, which was never his to live in. Plus the investment income he's been collecting for 20 years. I sat down beside her, my anger softening slightly in the face of her obvious distress. Sarah, I'm not here to destroy your family. I'm here to reclaim what was stolen from me. But the effect is the same, isn't it? She looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face. You're going to take everything. I'm going to take what's mine. And what about what's ours? What about my children, my brother, my mother? What about the life we've built? Before I could answer, Thomas reached us, his face red with exertion and panic. Sarah, don't say another word. Emma, I'm calling my lawyer. Call whoever you want, I said, standing up. But the deed is signed, the money is transferred, and your 20-year crime spree is over. Crime spree. Thomas's voice rose, drawing stares from the few remaining people in the auction house. I provided for you. I gave you a home, food, clothing. You gave me the bare minimum required by law, while you lived like a king on my inheritance. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. Did you really think I'd never find out? Did you think I'd stay that broken 17-year-old girl forever? You don't understand the pressure I was under. I understand perfectly. You saw an opportunity to steal from an orphan, and you took it. The only thing I don't understand is how you've been sleeping at night for 20 years. Thomas's composure finally cracked. You want to know how I've been sleeping? I haven't. Not for a single night since your parents died. because I loved your father like a brother, and I betrayed his memory every day by taking what he left for you. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected denials, excuses, legal threats. I hadn't expected the truth. Then why did you do it? Because I was weak, because my business was failing and I had a family to support, and the money was just sitting there. Tears were streaming down his face now, 20 years of guilt finally breaking free. Because I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back, that you'd never need to know. But you never paid it back. I tried. God help me, I tried. But the more I took, the deeper the hole got, until I was in so far I couldn't see a way out. He looked at his daughter, then back at me. Emma, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed your life. You didn't destroy my life, Thomas. You made it harder, but you didn't destroy it. I pulled the deed out of my purse and held it up. This is what destroyed lives look like. This is what happens when you steal from family. Please, Sarah said, standing up on shaky legs. Please, there has to be another way. Some kind of payment plan, some way to make this right without destroying everything. I looked at her, this woman who'd grown up in my house, lived off my money, built her life on the foundation of her father's crime. She was innocent, but she was also complicit, whether she'd known it or not. There is another way, I said slowly. Hope flared in both their eyes. What? Thomas signs over every asset he owns to me. His investment accounts, his retirement funds, his life insurance policies, everything. In exchange, I'll allow you to stay in the house for 1 year while you figure out your next steps. That's not, Thomas started. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. I checked my watch. You have 60 seconds to decide. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain starting to fall against the auction house windows. I could see Thomas calculating, weighing his options, trying to find some angle I hadn't considered. 50 seconds. Emma, please. 40 seconds. Dad, just take the deal, Sarah whispered. We can rebuild. We can start over. 30 seconds. Thomas looked at his daughter, then at his son Michael, who had finally approached and was standing behind Sarah with his arms crossed. The family resemblance was strong. They all had the same dark hair, the same stubborn chin, the same eyes that were now filled with desperation. 20 seconds. I'll do it, Thomas said quietly. I'll sign everything over. Good. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. David, it's Emma. I need you to draft a complete asset transfer agreement. Yes, everything. I'll send you the details. I ended the call and looked at Thomas, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. The paperwork will be ready tomorrow morning. We'll meet at my lawyer's office at 9 a.m. And then you get to experience what I experienced 20 years ago. You get to start over with nothing and see what you're really made of. I was walking toward the exit when I heard Michael speak for the first time. Emma, wait. I turned back, expecting another plea for mercy, another attempt to negotiate. Instead, Michael was holding something in his hand, a small, leather-bound journal that looked familiar. I think this belongs to you, he said, holding it out. I took the journal with trembling hands, recognizing it immediately. It was my father's diary, the one he kept during his final illness, the one I'd been looking for since the day he died. Where did you find this? In Dad's study, hidden behind some books. Michael's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. I read it, all of it, including the parts about you. My heart stopped. What parts? The parts where he talks about how proud he was of you, how he knew you'd be stronger than any of us, how he made Thomas promise to take care of you, not control you. Michael looked at his father with something that might have been disgust. He trusted you, Dad, and you betrayed that trust. Thomas's face crumpled. Michael. No, don't. Michael turned back to me. Emma, there's something else in that journal. Something about a second trust fund. One that Dad set up without telling anyone, including Thomas. I opened the journal with shaking hands, flipping to the pages Michael indicated. There, in my father's careful handwriting, was a description of a secondary trust fund worth $2.5 million, held in a bank in Switzerland, accessible only by me on my 35th birthday. My 35th birthday was next week. I looked up at Michael, then at Thomas, who had gone completely white. Did you know about this? No, Thomas whispered. I swear to you, I had no idea. But you do now. I closed the journal and held it against my chest, which means you know that everything you stole from me was just the beginning. You didn't just take my past. Thomas, you tried to steal my future. Emma, But I was already walking away, the journal clutched in my hands, and my mind racing with possibilities. The Swiss account changed everything. It meant I had resources I'd never known about, options I'd never considered. It also meant that Thomas's betrayal was even deeper than I'd imagined. I was almost to the parking lot when I heard the sound of running footsteps behind me. I turned to see Sarah chasing after me, her face streaked with tears and rain. Emma, please, you have to listen to me. I don't have to do anything. Yes, you do, because there's something else, something Michael didn't tell you. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my jacket. The journal, there's a page missing, a page that explains why Dad really took your money. I stared at her, rain dripping from my hair into my eyes. What are you talking about? The page is in my car. Dad made me promise never to show it to anyone, but after what I heard in there... She looked back at the auction house, where Thomas was visible through the windows, slumped in a chair with his head in his hands. Emma, you need to see it, because everything you think you know about that night, about why he took your money, it's all wrong. She was already walking toward her car, and despite every instinct telling me to leave, to drive away, and never look back, I found myself following her. Because after 20 years of believing I knew the truth, I was about to discover that some secrets run deeper than betrayal, and some family wounds never heal, they just get buried under bigger lies. The missing page felt like fire between my fingers as I read my father's words by the dim light of Sarah's car interior, the rain drumming against the windshield creating a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The smell of old leather and Sarah's nervous perfume filled the small space, but all I could focus on was the careful handwriting that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about my uncle's betrayal. Emma, I need you to understand something before you read that, Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the storm. My father isn't the man you think he is. He's not the man I thought he was either. I looked up from the page, seeing my own confusion reflected in her dark eyes. What do you mean? Read it first, then I'll explain. The words swam before my eyes as I tried to process what my father had written in his final days. Thomas came to me today with tears in his eyes and blood on his hands. He told me about the accident, about the family he killed, about the lawsuit that will destroy him. I know I should turn him in, but he's my brother, and Emma will need family when I'm gone. So I'm making a choice that will haunt me forever. I'm giving him access to Emma's trust fund to pay the settlement, with the understanding that he'll replace every penny from his own inheritance. God, forgive me for what I'm about to do to my daughter. The page slipped from my numb fingers, floating to the car floor like a dying leaf. He killed someone, a family of 4. Drunk driving, Christmas Eve 1994. Sarah's voice was hollow, mechanical. Dad was coming home from a business dinner, had too much wine, ran a red light. The Hendersons, parents and 2 little girls, ages 6 and 8. They died instantly. I felt like I was drowning in air. The trust fund money. went to pay the wrongful death settlement. $2 million to keep the case out of court, to keep Dad out of prison. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Your father knew he was dying, knew you'd need family, so he made a deal with the devil to protect his brother. But Thomas never paid it back. Because he couldn't. The guilt destroyed him. Emma, he started drinking, making bad business decisions, gambling. By the time he sobered up enough to try to make things right, there was nothing left to pay you back with. Sarah turned to face me fully. That's why he's been so sick these past few years. That's why he looks like he's dying. Because he's been carrying the weight of 4 deaths and your stolen future for 20 years. I stared out at the rain, trying to process this new version of the truth. Thomas wasn't just a greedy uncle who'd stolen from his orphan niece. He was a killer who'd used my inheritance to buy his freedom. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. All of it. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out another document. And because there's more. The paper was a medical report dated 3 months ago. Thomas Blackwood, diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. He's dying, I whispered. He's been dying since the day he killed that family. The cancer is just making it official. Sarah took the report back, her hands shaking. Emma, I know this doesn't change what he did to you. I know it doesn't give you back your childhood or your parents' money. But maybe it explains why he's been so desperate to make things right. Make things right. He just lost his house at auction. He didn't lose it. He orchestrated it. Sarah's words hit me like a physical blow. Emma, why do you think there were so few bidders today? Why do you think the auction house was half empty? I thought back to the auction, remembering how easy it had been to win, how little competition there'd been for such a valuable property. What are you saying? I'm saying Dad spent the last 6 months quietly discouraging potential buyers, spreading rumors about structural problems, environmental issues, legal complications. He wanted you to be able to buy the house back, wanted to make sure no one else could outbid you. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. He wanted me to win. He's been tracking your success for years, Emma. He knew you'd built a fortune, knew you had the resources to reclaim what was yours. The auction wasn't his downfall, it was his plan. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. Look at these. He's been coordinating with the auction house for months, making sure everything went smoothly. I read the messages with growing disbelief. Thomas had indeed been manipulating the auction, but not to keep the house, to ensure I could take it back. Every detail had been planned, from the timing to the starting bid to the lack of serious competition. But why? Why go through this elaborate charade instead of just giving me the house? Because he knew you'd never accept it as a gift. Because he knew you needed to take it to feel like you'd won. Sarah's voice cracked. Because he spent 20 years watching you succeed despite what he did to you. And he's so proud of the woman you've become that he can't bear to die without giving you back what was yours. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for 20 years. He's proud of me? He has newspaper clippings about every deal you've made, every company you've acquired, every success you've achieved. He keeps them in a scrapbook next to his bed. Sarah was crying openly now. Emma, he knows he destroyed your relationship with him, but he's never stopped loving you. He's never stopped being proud to be your uncle. The car felt too small, too warm, too full of revelations I wasn't ready to process. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain, letting the cold water wash over me as I tried to make sense of everything I'd learned. Thomas wasn't just a thief. He was a killer who'd used my money to escape justice. But he was also a dying man who'd spent his final months trying to give me back what he'd stolen. The uncle who destroyed my life was the same man who'd been secretly celebrating my success for 20 years. I was still standing in the rain when I heard car doors slamming behind me. Thomas, Michael, and Sarah were all approaching, their faces grim with the weight of secrets finally exposed. "Emma," Thomas said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Sarah told you about the accident, about the family you killed, about how you used my inheritance to buy your way out of prison." I turned to face him, rain streaming down my face like tears. "Yes, she told me. I know there's nothing I can say." "You're right. There's nothing." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. "4 people died because of your choices, Thomas. 4 innocent people, including 2 little girls who never got the chance to grow up." "I know. And instead of facing the consequences, you stole from your dead brother's daughter to make the problem go away." "Yes. And then you spent 20 years letting me believe you were just greedy, just selfish, when the truth was so much worse." Thomas nodded, tears mixing with rain on his weathered face. "I wanted to tell you. Every day for 20 years, I wanted to tell you the truth. But you didn't, because I was a coward, because I knew that if you learned what I'd really done, you'd never forgive me, and I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me even more than you already did." I stared at this man who'd shaped my entire adult life through his choices, trying to reconcile the uncle I'd thought I knew with the killer standing before me. "The Swiss account," I said suddenly. "Did Dad know about the accident when he set it up?" Thomas's face went pale. "What Swiss account?" I pulled out the journal and showed him the relevant page. "The Secondary Trust Fund, $2.5 million, accessible on my 35th birthday." Thomas read the entry with growing amazement. I had no idea. He never told me about this. Because he knew you'd steal from that too? Because he knew I'd try to talk him out of it. Thomas handed the journal back to me. "Emma, your father was dying when he wrote this. He was on heavy pain medication, not thinking clearly. If he'd lived longer, he would have told you about the account himself. But he didn't live longer. He died. And you let me struggle for 20 years when there was money sitting in Switzerland that could have changed everything. I didn't know." Thomas's voice cracked with desperation. "I swear to you, I had no idea the account existed." I believed him. The pain in his eyes was too real, too raw to be fake. But it didn't change the fundamental truth. My father had tried to provide for me, and Thomas's actions had prevented me from accessing that provision. "It doesn't matter," I said finally. "Knowing doesn't change anything." "Doesn't it?" Michael stepped forward, his face set with determination. "Emma, there's something else you need to know. About the Henderson family." "What about them?" "They had a son. He survived the accident, but he was badly injured. Brain damage, permanent disability. He's been in a care facility for 20 years, and the settlement money ran out 5 years ago." The words hit me like ice water. "There's a survivor. His name is Danny Henderson. He's 28 now, but mentally he's still 8 years old. The state has been covering his care, but the facility is closing next month due to budget cuts." Michael pulled out his phone and showed me a news article. He's going to be transferred to a state institution unless someone can pay for private care. I stared at the photo of a young man with the face of a child sitting in a wheelchair and smiling at the camera with innocent joy. This was the cost of Thomas's choices. Not just 4 deaths, but a lifetime of suffering for the one who survived. "How much?" I asked quietly. "For proper care, about $50,000 a year." I did the math quickly. The Swiss account would be more than enough to provide for Danny Henderson's care for the rest of his life, with money left over for other victims of drunk driving accidents. "Emma," Thomas said softly, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if there's any way you could help that boy, help him." I turned to face my uncle, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the villain I'd imagined, Not the broken man seeking redemption, but something more complex, a killer who'd spent 20 years trying to atone for his crimes. Thomas, I'm not going to help him. I'm going to do something better. What? I'm going to give him everything. The Swiss account, the house, the money from your asset transfer, all of it. Every penny that came from your crime is going to go toward caring for your victim. Thomas's face went white. Emma, you can't. I can and I will. It's blood money, Thomas. All of it. And I won't build my future on the foundation of a dead family. But what about you? What about your life, your future? I'll do what I've always done. I'll build something from nothing. I looked at Sarah and Michael, seeing my own determination reflected in their faces. But this time, I'll do it with a clear conscience. Emma, please, Sarah said. Think about what you're saying. That's millions of dollars. That's justice. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. David, it's Emma again. I need you to set up a trust fund. Yes, immediately. For the care of Danny Henderson. I was still on the phone when I heard the sound of a car door slamming. I looked up to see Thomas walking away, his shoulders shaking with sobs, heading toward a black sedan that had just pulled up. Where's he going? I asked Sarah. To turn himself in. She was crying again, her voice barely audible. He said if you were brave enough to give up everything for justice, he could be brave enough to face the consequences of his actions. I watched the sedan drive away, carrying my uncle toward a reckoning 20 years in the making. A part of me wanted to call him back, to tell him that dying of cancer was punishment enough. But I knew he was right. Some crimes couldn't be atoned for with money or good intentions. They could only be answered with truth. What happens now? Michael asked. Now we figure out how to live with the truth. I said, all of us. I was walking back to my car when Sarah called out to me one last time. Emma, wait. There's one more thing. I turned back, exhausted by revelations and ready to leave this day behind. What? The Henderson boy, Danny. He's been asking about the accident for years. The doctors say he has fragments of memory, pieces of that night, that he can't quite put together. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He's been asking about the man who hit his family. He wants to meet him. The words hit me like a physical blow. He wants to meet Thomas? He wants to forgive him. I stared at Sarah, trying to process this final twist in a day full of impossible revelations. The survivor of Thomas's crime wanted to offer forgiveness to the man who destroyed his family. How do you know this? Because I've been visiting him. 4 or 5 years. Ever since I found out the truth about the accident. I've been reading to him, bringing him books, trying to do something good with the guilt I've been carrying. You've been visiting him? Every week. He's wonderful, Emma. Innocent and kind and full of joy despite everything that was taken from him. And he's been waiting 20 years to tell the man who hurt him that he forgives him. I felt something shift inside my chest, something that had been frozen for 20 years finally beginning to thaw. Sarah, I know it doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't make up for what Dad did. But maybe it means something that the person who lost the most is the one most willing to forgive. I looked back toward the road where Thomas's car had disappeared, then at the auction house where this day had started, then at the journal in my hands that contained my father's final words. 20 years ago, I'd lost my parents, my inheritance, and my faith in family. Today, I'd learned that the truth was more complicated than I'd ever imagined, that justice was more complex than simple revenge, and that forgiveness was possible even in the face of unforgivable crimes. But I'd also learned something else, something that would change everything about how I moved forward. I wasn't the only victim of Thomas's choices, and I wasn't the only one who deserved a chance at healing. Sarah, I said quietly, I want to meet him. Danny Henderson. I want to meet the boy who survived. Are you sure? I'm sure, because if he can forgive the man who destroyed his family, maybe I can figure out how to forgive the uncle who stole my childhood. As we drove through the rain toward the care facility where Danny Henderson waited, I realized that this day hadn't ended the way I'd planned. I'd come to the auction seeking revenge and found something more complicated. A family secret that went deeper than betrayal, a crime that demanded justice, and a victim who offered grace. But I still didn't know the biggest secret of all. I didn't know that Danny Henderson wasn't just a survivor of Thomas's drunk driving accident. He was my cousin, and the family I thought I'd lost 20 years ago was about to get a lot more complicated. The care facility smelled like disinfectant and hope, a combination that made my stomach clench as Sarah led me down the sterile hallway toward Danny Henderson's room. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the polished linoleum, mixing with the distant murmur of television sets and the soft voices of caregivers. I clutched my father's journal against my chest like armor, trying to prepare myself for meeting the boy whose life had been shattered by my uncle's choices. But nothing could have prepared me for what Sarah whispered as we stopped outside room 247. Emma, there's something I need to tell you before we go in. Something about Danny, that changes everything. Her voice was barely audible, and I could smell the fierce sweat on her skin despite the cool air conditioning. He's not just a victim of Dad's accident. He's family. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? The Hendersons weren't strangers. Emma, Margaret Henderson, was Dad's sister. Our aunt. Danny is our cousin. Sarah's face was pale, her hands shaking as she reached for the door handle. Dad didn't just kill a random family that night. He killed his own sister and her children. I felt the world tilt sideways, the journal slipping from my numb fingers to clatter on the floor. That's impossible. Margaret had been estranged from the family for years. She married young, moved away, changed her name. Dad probably didn't even recognize her car when he... Sarah's voice broke. When he ran the red light, but the settlement, the lawsuit, was handled by Margaret's husband's family. They had no idea she was related to Dad, and he was too destroyed by guilt to tell them. Sarah bent to pick up the journal, her movements careful and deliberate. Emma, Dad didn't just steal your inheritance to avoid prison. He stole it to pay blood money to his own nephew. I leaned against the wall, trying to process this final revelation. Thomas hadn't just killed 4 strangers. He destroyed his own family. The money he'd taken from me had gone to care for a boy who shared our blood, a cousin I'd never known existed. Does Danny know? He knows his mother had a brother she didn't talk to. He knows there was some kind of family fight before he was born, but he doesn't know that the man who killed his family was his uncle. Sarah's eyes were red with unshed tears. He doesn't know that we're his cousins. And you want me to tell him? I want you to meet him first, to see who he is, what he's like, and then we can decide together what he deserves to know. The door to room 247 was painted cheerful yellow with a nameplate that read Danny Henderson in bright blue letters. Through the small window, I could see a young man sitting by the window, his profile silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. He looked peaceful, content, completely unaware that his life was about to change again. Sarah knocked softly, and a voice called out, "Come in." The room was small but bright, filled with books and puzzles and the kind of simple decorations that spoke of a mind that found joy in uncomplicated things. Danny Henderson sat in a wheelchair by the window, a book open in his lap, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure when he saw Sarah. "Sarah, you came back." His voice was higher than I'd expected, with the enthusiasm of a child despite his 28-year-old body. "I finished the book you brought me, the one about the dragons. It was really good. I'm glad you liked it, Danny." Sarah moved to his side, her voice gentle and warm. "I brought someone to meet you. This is Emma. She's a friend of mine." Danny looked at me with curious eyes, and I felt my breath catch. He had the same dark hair as Sarah and Michael, the same stubborn chin, the same eyes that marked him unmistakably as a Blackwood. How had no one noticed the family resemblance? "Hi, Emma," he said, extending his hand with the formal politeness of someone who'd been taught good manners. "I'm Danny. Do you like books?" "I do." I managed, taking his hand and feeling the calluses from years of physical therapy. "What kind of books do you like?" "All kinds, but especially the ones with happy endings. Sarah brings me lots of books with happy endings." He looked between us with innocent curiosity. "Are you going to be my friend too?" The question hit me like a knife to the chest. This sweet, damaged young man was asking if I wanted to be his friend, not knowing that I was his cousin, that my uncle had destroyed his life, that the money meant to secure my future had been used to pay for his care. "I'd like that very much," I said, and meant it. For the next hour, I sat with Danny and Sarah, listening to him talk about his books, his puzzles, his dreams of someday living in a house with a garden where he could grow flowers. He was intelligent despite his brain injury, kind despite his losses, hopeful despite having every reason to be bitter. And he was dying. Sarah had mentioned it quietly while Danny was showing me his collection of dragon figurines. The same accident that had killed his family had damaged his heart, and the doctors said he had maybe 2 years left. The care facility closing was almost a mercy. He wouldn't need long-term placement. "Danny," I said as our visit was winding down, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever think about the accident? About what happened to your family?" His face grew serious, and for a moment I saw flashes of the trauma he carried. "Sometimes. I remember pieces. The car coming fast, the sound of breaking glass, my mom screaming." He was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with eyes that held more wisdom than they should. "But I try not to be angry about it." "Why not?" "Because being angry hurts, and I've been hurt enough. And because the man who hit us, I think he's probably hurt too. I think he probably wishes he could take it back." Danny reached for my hand, his touch gentle and warm. "I hope someday I can tell him that I forgive him. I think that might help both of us feel better." I felt tears streaming down my face, this broken young man's grace overwhelming me completely. "Danny, what if I told you that man was someone you knew, someone in your family?" "I'd still forgive him," he said without hesitation. "Family is supposed to forgive each other, right? That's what love means." Sarah was crying openly now, and I could see my own emotions reflected in her face. Here was a young man who'd lost everything, his parents, his sisters, his health, his future, and his response was to offer forgiveness to the person who'd taken it all away. "Danny," I said carefully, "what would you say if I told you that Sarah and I are your cousins, that we're family?" He stared at me for a long moment, processing this information with the careful deliberation of someone whose mind worked differently than most. Then his face broke into the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. "Really? You're my family? Really? That's the best news ever. I always wanted more family." He looked between Sarah and me with pure joy. "Does this mean you'll visit me more? Does this mean I'm not alone anymore?" "You're not alone," I said, my voice breaking. "You'll never be alone again." We were still talking when a commotion in the hallway interrupted us. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with the staff, footsteps moving quickly toward our room. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances as the voices grew closer. The door burst open, and Thomas stumbled in, flanked by 2 police officers. He looked terrible. His face was gray with exhaustion and pain, his clothes disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. "Emma, thank God you're here," he gasped. "I need to see him. I need to see Danny before they take me away." "Sir, "You need to come with us," one of the officers said firmly. "You've already given your statement. Please, just 5 minutes. I've been carrying this for 20 years, and I need to make it right." Danny looked between the officers and Thomas with confusion and growing alarm. "What's happening? Who is this man?" The room fell silent except for the sound of Thomas's labored breathing and the distant hum of the facility's air conditioning. I could see the moment of recognition in Danny's eyes as he studied Thomas's face, seeing the family resemblance, putting together pieces of a puzzle he'd been carrying for 20 years. "You're him," Danny said quietly. "You're the man from the accident." Thomas fell to his knees beside Danny's wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. "Danny, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to your family, to your life. I've been living with the guilt every day for 20 years. You're my uncle," Danny said, his voice filled with wonder rather than anger. "Your Uncle Thomas. Mom used to talk about you sometimes, before the fight. You remember me? I remember Mom crying after phone calls with you. I remember her saying she wished things could be different." Danny reached out and touched Thomas's face with gentle fingers. "She loved you, even when she was angry." Thomas broke down completely, sobbing against Danny's wheelchair, while the police officers waited with uncomfortable patience. "I killed them, Danny. I killed your parents and your sisters because I was drunk and stupid and selfish. I destroyed your life." "No," Danny said firmly. "You hurt me, but you didn't destroy me. I'm still here. I'm still me." He looked around the room at Sarah and me, then back at Thomas. "And now I have family again. That's not destruction. That's a gift. Danny, I don't deserve your forgiveness." "That's not how forgiveness works," Danny interrupted with the simple wisdom of someone who'd spent years thinking about grace. "Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what love does." I watched this exchange with a mixture of awe and heartbreak, seeing 20 years of guilt and pain finally meeting 20 years of grace and healing. Danny had every right to hate Thomas, to demand justice, to let him carry his guilt to the grave. Instead, he was offering the one thing Thomas needed most: absolution. "I forgive you, Uncle Thomas," Danny said clearly. "I forgive you for the accident, for taking my family, for all the pain. And I want you to forgive yourself, too." Thomas looked up at his nephew with wonder and disbelief. "How can you forgive me? How can you be so kind after what I did?" "Because that's what family does. And because holding on to anger would just hurt me more." Danny smiled, that same radiant expression that had welcomed me an hour earlier. "Besides, you gave me something too. What could I possibly have given you? You gave me Emma and Sarah. You brought my cousins to me. Maybe that was God's way of making something good come from something terrible." The police officers were getting restless, and I could see them preparing to take Thomas away. But there was one more thing that needed to happen, one more piece of this broken family that needed to be put back together. "Thomas," I said, standing up and walking to where he knelt beside Danny's wheelchair, "I need to tell you something." He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "What?" "I forgive you too." The words came out easier than I'd expected, carrying with them 20 years of anger and resentment that suddenly felt too heavy to hold. "I forgive you for stealing my inheritance, for lying to me, for making me feel worthless. I forgive you for the accident, for the choices you made, for all of it." "Emma." "I'm not finished." I knelt down beside him, taking his hands in mine. "I also want to thank you." "Thank me?" "For making me strong, for forcing me to build my own life, my own success, my own identity. If you hadn't taken everything from me, I never would have learned what I was capable of." I looked around the room at Sarah, at Danny, at the family I'd never known I had, and I never would have found my way back to the people who matter most. Thomas stared at me with disbelief. "You're thanking me for destroying your life?" I'm thanking you for teaching me that I'm stronger than anything that can be taken from me. And I'm thanking you for bringing me to Danny, for showing me what real grace looks like. The police officers finally stepped forward, their patience exhausted. Mr. Blackwood, we need to go now. Thomas stood slowly, his body racked with pain and exhaustion. But his face had changed. The desperate guilt had been replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Will you take care of him? He asked me. Will you make sure Danny has everything he needs? I'll do better than that. I said, I'll make sure he has family. Real family, who will love him and protect him and never leave him alone again. And the Swiss account will go toward Danny's care and toward helping other victims of drunk driving accidents. The money will finally be used for something good. Thomas nodded, then turned to Danny one last time. I love you, nephew. I'm sorry it took me 20 years to tell you that. I love you too, Uncle Thomas, and I'll pray for you every day. As the police led Thomas away, I sat back down beside Danny's wheelchair, feeling emotionally drained, but somehow lighter than I'd felt in years. The anger that had driven me for 2 decades was gone, replaced by something more complex, but infinitely more healing. Understanding. Emma, Danny said quietly, are you sad that Uncle Thomas is going away? A little, but I'm also proud of him for finally doing the right thing. Me too. Danny reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Will you really take care of me? Will you really be my family? For as long as you'll have me. Forever then. I want you to be my family forever. I looked around the room that would soon be empty when the facility closed, then at Sarah, who was wiping tears from her eyes, then at Danny, whose face was bright with hope despite everything he'd endured. Danny, I said, how would you feel about coming to live with me? I have a big house, now our family's house, and it has a garden where you could grow flowers. His face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? I could live with you. If you want to, we could be a real family. You, me, Sarah, Michael, we could take care of each other. That sounds like the best happy ending ever. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind the Blackwood estate, watching Danny tend to the flower beds he'd planted with the enthusiasm of someone discovering joy for the first time. The house that had once represented everything stolen from me had become something new, a home filled with laughter and love and the kind of family bonds that couldn't be broken by betrayal or time. Thomas had died in prison 3 weeks after his sentencing, his body finally succumbing to the cancer that had been eating away at him for years. But he died at peace, having finally faced the consequences of his actions and received the forgiveness he'd never thought possible. The Swiss account had indeed been real, and I'd used every penny to establish the Henderson Foundation, providing care and support for victims of drunk driving accidents and their families. Danny had insisted on being involved in the foundation's work, his story of forgiveness inspiring others to find healing in the midst of tragedy. Sarah and Michael had moved into the guest cottage, and we'd slowly learned how to be a family again, not the family we'd been born into, but the family we'd chosen to become. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments when the weight of our shared history threatened to overwhelm us. But we had something stronger than history now. We had love and forgiveness, and the knowledge that some bonds can survive even the worst betrayals. Emma, Danny called from the garden, his voice bright with excitement. Come see, the roses are blooming. I walked over to where he knelt among the flower beds, his face radiant with simple joy. The roses were indeed blooming, deep red blossoms that caught the afternoon light like drops of blood transformed into beauty. They're beautiful, Danny. They're like us, he said with a profound simplicity that never failed to amaze me. They grew from something that looked dead, but they're more beautiful than ever. I knelt beside my cousin in the garden of our family home, surrounded by flowers that had grown from soil watered with tears and tended with love. 20 years ago, I'd lost everything I thought mattered. Today, I'd found everything that actually did. The roses bloomed around us, and the sun was shining, and we were home,